Let's go to Chris Hipkins, who's the Labour leader, joining us live from Parliament this morning. Good morning.
Good morning.
So National has said, no, we're not going to look at fuel excise cuts yet, too early. Would you go back there?
They need to keep the options on the table at this point. If fuel does get up to $3.50, $4 a litre, the government needs to have options on the table. Now, at the moment, those estimates are sort of at the extreme scenario end, but we need to be prepared for any eventuality. Who knows how long this is going to go on for?
So it'd be an option on the table?
We reduced fuel tax when fuel prices got well over $3 a litre because we knew that households were really struggling with that. Some people were having to make choices about, not being able to drive to work, not being able to drop their kids at school. They were having to make impossible choices, and we felt that it was one of the things we could do to help. We lowered public transport fares at the same time. That also helped households. Governments do have options. We need to see how this plays out a little bit. At the moment, from what we hear yesterday, the government claims we've got at least 2 months' worth of fuel supply secure. That's good news for New Zealand, but we've got to see how this all plays out over the next few months.
When you say they claim, do you not believe them?
I just have no basis on which to question them. I think
Right.
you have to accept them at face value. There's a chunk of that is fuel that's on the water at the moment. Of course, we all feel better once it's here, but they're saying that it's within New Zealand's territorial waters. If that's the case, then that's good news.
What's the price at which fuel is unaffordable for people?
It depends who you are. For some households, it's not going to make a huge difference if it's over $3. For other households, that's going to be the difference between them being able to survive and them not being able to make ends meet.
So how do you determine then
to keep its options on the table here?
How do you determine when to step in? Because the point Nicola Willis was making is, yes, there will be people who won't be able to afford it, but by giving an excise cut, you leave a hole in the transport budget. You're borrowing more, then we're paying for it anyway.
And if you don't do things to support households, you leave a hole in households' individual budgets, and they're far less able to absorb that than the government can. And so we do need to keep our options on the table here. I'm not saying that the government should be rushing headlong into committing to do this right now. I think it's too soon for that, but I don't think they should be taking the option off the table.
Good thing that we are in the debt, it's not ideal, but it could be worse, our debt to GDP ratio. Does this not prove the government's point that you need to be prepared, you need to make sure your spending is under control so that when, not if, but when global events like this happen, you are ready to deal with them?
Well, debt to GDP is actually higher now than it was forecast to be before the last election. So Nicola Willis has made that problem worse for New Zealand, not better. So her claiming that New Zealand's in a great position to weather this because we have a low debt to GDP ratio is largely a tribute to the previous government, not to her actions, which have made that problem worse, not better.
But their ratio right now is better than yours was projected to be.
That's not true.
That's true.
It's simply not true, Ryan. But
if we'd stuck with
cuts have increased. Nicola Willis's tax cuts have increased New Zealand's debt to GDP ratio. She's borrowed money to pay for tax cuts that we told her before the last election were unaffordable.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm happy to be corrected on that, and we will certainly look at it afterwards. But that was my understanding. When it comes to that ratio, what is acceptable in your view? Because I know you haven't really laid out any policies yet, other than a few spending ones here and there. What's an acceptable level for you as Labour leader?
The question around government debt is what you're borrowing money for or what you're spending that money on. If you're borrowing money to pay for long-lived infrastructure assets that are going to benefit, successive generations, then that's a totally justified approach for funding long-lived assets. If you're borrowing money to pay the day-to-day bills, like pay more people to be on the job seeker benefit, which is what the current government are doing, then that's ultimately not a good thing. That's not something the government should be doing. The government needs to get the balance right here, and at the moment they're reducing investment in long-lived assets, so they're spending less money on infrastructure and they're spending more money on job seeker benefits. I think we need to flip that around.
Hey, what's the situation with COVID? Do you think when this report, have you seen the report yet that's coming out later today?
I knew you were going to ask me that, Ryan. Yes, I have. And I am going to respect the embargo. The government have given us the report under embargo so that we can read that. Ultimately, I think the question a lot of people are going to find themselves asking after this is what was the point of the second inquiry. ultimately, I think, New Zealanders all have a view one way or the other on, how they think that played out. I don't think this report's going to add a lot to that.
Okay, because I've had a read and there's some interesting stuff in there.
Thank you.
So you think not
See you
worth
soon.
the paper it's written on. Is there anyone, after having read the report, is there anyone you would like to apologise to?
Ultimately, if you look at anything like the COVID response, and I think people will see that the Royal Commission reflect on this. You look anything like the COVID response where decisions are made in a hurry under a huge amount of pressure, and you spend 2.5 years going back and revisiting those decisions and saying, oh, well, what if we did this instead, or what if we did that instead? You're going to reach some different conclusions. We didn't have all of that luxury of time and more information when we were making those decisions. So are there lessons to learn? Absolutely. Are there things you could do differently in a future pandemic? Yes, absolutely. The real question for the current government is, have they taken any of this on board? The first Royal Commission made a whole lot of recommendations about how we could be better prepared for the next pandemic, and the government have done nothing with them. If anything, we're less prepared for another pandemic in the future now than we were when COVID arrived.
All right, so no sorries from Chippy. That's all right. You don't have to. I'm just asking.
Overall, it was a really difficult time for New Zealand. There was huge disruption. There would have been even more disruption for New Zealand had we not done what we did.
All right, fair enough. Just say no sorries.
Gone through the country and tens of thousands of people had died. There would have been more hardship for New Zealand. So the response was never going to be perfect. Can we be proud of our response as a country? I think we can.
Okay. Very quickly, a couple of very quick things. Do you have any new policies for us this morning?
Well, we've announced the New Zealand Future Fund, which is going to keep jobs in New Zealand by investing in New Zealand.
Yes, I know. I mean new ones.
We've got
people are criticising you for not having any
investment into.
Yes, I know about those.
Businesses. We've got 3 free doctors' visits so that people can stay healthy.
Yes, we know.
In a hospital emergency.
New.
We announced a tax credit for the video gaming industry so that we can keep those jobs here in New Zealand. So there's plenty of policy coming from the Labor Party, Ryan. I mean, I know you don't like to talk about the policy that we've actually announced.
Chris, we've done it ad nauseum. We do it every week. Don't be unfair. Don't be unkind. I might need an apology from you.
These things every week. You never ask me about them, Ryan.
Hey, we've asked you plenty of questions about them. Don't be dismissive. I was just curious whether you had anything new you were going to give us on the show. That was all. Nothing too nefarious about it. Finally, Te Pāti Māori, do you have a sort of a position yet on whether you will work with them or not?
Well, this is another question that you ask me every single week about, Ryan, and nothing's really changed in the last few weeks. At this point, it's still too early for any political parties to be, measuring up the curtains for new officers in the beehive.
Okay.
The election is still several months.
So you can't criticise me for
half a year to go.
You can't criticise me for asking questions that you still haven't decided on yet, can you? Otherwise, how would we know? That's the point of it.
Well, we'll set out. I'm going to give you the same answer. You can keep asking me. I'll give you the same answer, which is closer to the election. We'll set out where we've got compatibility with other parties and where they're proposing things that we just could never support.